Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to Rushcliffe Borough Council's Community Scrutiny Group meeting. I think it's the first one of the year, so I wish everybody a happy new year and welcome. I would like to remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the local authorities Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the council's control. May I remind councillors to please switch off your microphones when you are not speaking. And just to go through the introductions of who we've got with us tonight, got Darryl Birch, Services Manager for Neighbourhoods, Jeff Carpenter, Service Manager Public Protection and Safety. We've got Councillor Andy Brown, who's attending as a representative from Rushcliffe Borough Council on East Midlands Airport Independent Consultative Committee, or ICC. We have Neil Robinson, Group CSR and Airspace Change Director. We have Johan Reid Aspley, Head of Corporate Affairs at East Midlands Airport. So go to the first item on the agenda for apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Billen and we have Councillor Thomas substituting this evening.
Thank you to Councillor Thomas for substituting. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any? Oh.
Yeah, just I don't know if that needs to declare or not, but it's my privilege to sit on the Independent Consultative Committee at the airport as the representative for Nottinghamshire County Council.
Right, we'll move on to item 3, minutes of the meeting from the 5th of October 2023. Do we have any questions or observations, or if councillors are quite happy for me to sign those? Could I have a show of hands for approval, please? Thank you. Right, and going on to item 4, which is the substantial item of tonight's agenda, East Midlands Airport, the impact of future flight path changes and aircraft noise in general. I'll pass to Councillor Andy Brown to just give an introduction on his role and remit as the representative on ICC.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'll first of all just give you a brief intro to what the Consultative Committee is. The Airport Consultative Committee, such as our ICC, are a well-established way in which airports can engage with key stakeholders in the local area and beyond. The ICC seeks to hold the precarious balance between the interests of civil aviation, of passengers and other users of the airport, and of people living in the area and the local environment. The ICC operates according to government guidelines and has, as members, representatives from local authorities, airport user groups and local interest groups. To enable more frequent dialogue between the ICC and the airport, the committee meets 3 times a year, with the final meeting of the year being the general ICC meeting. There are 2 subcommittees known as Monitoring, Environment, Noise and Track, known as the MENT Committee, and Transport, Economic Development and Passenger Services, TEP Committee. Each of these subcommittees meets 3 times each year. There's also a 3rd committee, the Community Fund Committee. Personally, I sit on obviously the ICC main general committee and also the MENT Monitoring, Environment, Noise and Track Committee. I also sit on the funding committee as well, one of 4 members on that. And that committee is made up of 1 from each county and a member of a company that sits at the airport. At this moment in time, it's a member from the post office. The work we do on the MENT committee is pretty explanatory, really. Monitoring the environment, we look after, ensure that the water runoff that goes into the the reed beds, we get reports regularly on that, for example. Noise, we get the feedback and looking at the noise and the monitoring the local noise monitors, and also the track compliance, making sure that aircraft are using the correct tracks, following the correct departure and approach tracks. That's basically, just putting it in a nutshell. There's lots of other items on the agenda as well, I can assure you. They're just basically what they are. My personal interest in the airport goes back to 1974, where I did all my flying training out of East Midlands Airport. I've been involved with the airfield ever until 2 years ago when I gave up flying. I served 8 years on the ICC with Notts County Council, and in my 9th year now representing Rushcliffe on the ICC. Going on to the funding committee, for example, the work we do there, the monies that are raised from that are from aircraft that don't comply with the tracks, or they go over the noise decibel limit and are fined for doing so. And the monies collected from that is distributed on application from funding within the area. For example, at our meeting in December, we gave £10,000 to Gotham Memorial Hall, which burnt down, if you remember, to put solar panels on the roof. And another, from that particular meeting, we gave money to the church at Westleek for repairs on the church. That's just an example of the work we do on that particular committee. The years I've been involved with it, I've seen many improvements over those many years I've been, in and out of the airport. Improvements, especially in aircraft technology. Noise, the engines are not what they used to be back in 1974. They're a lot quieter. Airframes are a lot quieter than they used to be with modern technology as well. So from a personal point of view, and the work the ICC do, they overlook and make sure that these improvements are put in place. Basically it, Chair, unless anybody's got any questions. Yeah, fine.
Mr. Over to you now for your presentation.
Thank you. Well, look, we've got a presentation. We've got about a dozen slides to go through. We'll go through them actually quite quickly to make sure we allow plenty of time for the conversation afterwards. I guess before we get started, would it be helpful for you and I just to say a couple of words to introduce ourselves as to where we come from? So I'm Neil Robinson. As the chair explained, I'm the CSR and Future Airspace Director for Manchester Airports Group. So I work across the 3 airports in the group, that's East Midlands, Manchester and Stansted. I do lead on environmental issues generally for the group. And although I work across the group, I do happen to live in the East Midlands, and I've spent many years at East Midlands, and it's a long association I have. So I'm across much of the development of the environmental controls that we've got in place. Joined this evening by Johan.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you. My name is Johan Reid-Aspby. I'm Head of Corporate Affairs at East Midlands Airport. I've been working at the airport since 2017. In that role as Corporate Affairs lead, I also sit on the airport's senior leadership team, and my role is really to build the relationships that are important in this region to allow the airport to continue to make a valuable contribution to the local economy. And sitting within my team are the media function, social media, so anything you see in social media about the airport and the content we push out sits within our remit too. I'll start by just providing a little summary of where we are as an airport and as a business at the moment, then I'll hand back over to Neil, who will talk a little bit more detail about the airspace programme in particular. I think that the fairest summary really is that the airport is almost back to where it was pre-pandemic, both in terms of its passenger operation and its cargo operation. And by the end of this financial year, so the year ending in a couple of months' time, at the end of March, we expect to have seen about 4 million passengers come through the airport. So prior to the pandemic, we were seeing about 4.6 million passengers. So the smaller airports in the country have taken slightly longer to get back to where they were pre-pandemic, primarily because the airlines that serve the airports have consolidated their operations in the bigger airports. So our sister airports, Manchester and Stansted, are back to where they were in terms of passenger numbers already. But by the end of next summer, we expect almost to be back where we were. But the passenger operations and the cargo operations has been well documented, were affected in very different ways in the pandemic. When passengers couldn't fly, there was increased demand for the cargo operation at East Midlands Airport, primarily because a lot of the goods that fly around the world fly on the belly hold of passenger aircraft. And if they weren't in the sky, those goods couldn't move on those aircraft. And therefore, the customers that rely on the connectivity of long-haul passenger flights to move their goods had to turn to the dedicated cargo operators at East Midlands Airport to move their freight around the world. So those of you who are familiar with the airport will have seen that the volume of cargo going through the airport in the pandemic years saw quite a spike. Now, we always knew that once the pandemic was over and supply chains and the logistics frameworks around the world that move goods around normalized, then we would see a normalization of the volume of cargo coming through the airport, and that has happened. And so we're almost back where we were in 2018-19 now in terms of volumes around that. Because passenger numbers are coming back, and there's clearly a desire for people to want to go on holiday and travel to their favourite leisure destinations in Europe and North Africa, which are the main destinations that East Midlands Airport serves. We are investing heavily in our passenger facilities, and you may have seen some headlines in the last week or so announcing £120 million of investment in the airport over the next 5 years, which is probably the single largest bit of investment in East Midlands Airport during MAG's ownership, which is fantastic news for those who use the airport on a regular basis. Some of that, if go on to the next slide, please, actually, because some nice pictures on the next slide. Jump the slide there, I think. Well, as we find that slide, the next slides are coming. We'll show some pictures of the forecourt and the terminal of the building, so the airport is going through a process of upgrading its security functions at the moment, and every airport in the UK has to do that in line with the government mandate to introduce new security technology. If you go on to the next slide as well, please. Thank you. There we are. For those of you who can see the slides in the room and online as well. So the new security equipment that has to be installed in the coming years is larger and requires more space, and therefore we're having to enlarge our security hall. And so some work is happening around that. But while we're doing that, we're going to invest in a complete refresh of the interior, so it look modern and clean, so people's first experience of the airport will be even better, and will improve that effortless travel that customers of East Midlands have come very accustomed to when they're using the airport. And we've just done some research recently which suggests actually that people are perhaps prepared to travel slightly further than we imagined to access that operation, because East Midlands is a slightly smaller operation. People are getting through security very quickly. 100% of our passengers are getting through within under 15 minutes. And once they're through, we want them to have a great experience in the terminal. So we're doing a lot of work in the security hall. We're refreshing a lot of the retail units, some new toilets, refreshing the restaurants and bars, and putting in some new seating. So that's going to be great for the passengers. Some of that will be in place by Easter, which is the beginning of our peak summer season. Because we're expanding the security hall out a little bit, there's going to be a reconfiguration of the forecourt area, which means we are starting also to think about how we can improve the drop-off facilities in front of the terminal as well, which are not fit for purpose and weren't designed for the volume of passengers that come through, particularly as they come through in the sort of peaky nature of our operation, when the vast majority of our passengers come through very early in the morning and in the summer months for a second wave of flights in the afternoon. And there is a bit of a bottleneck there, so we're looking at how we can improve that, making some investment around that too. The other bit, which is not on this slide here, is the work. The other bit of the work I do particularly as well is we're completely engaged in all of the work that's happening in the region to develop an economic strategy across the East Midlands to bring in inward investment. The airport is at the heart of much of that work, both in terms of the work we do in parallel with East Midlands Development Corporation, but also as the port of the East Midlands Freeport. We're working very closely with the Freeport on that strategy to help realise the benefits that will hopefully come as a result of being the UK's only inland freeport. So they are some of the headlines for how things are at the moment. So I'll hand back over to Neil, who will talk you through some of the specific initiatives around our CSR agenda and airspace.
Thank you, Jan. I thought I'd start with an overview, really, as to when we talk about corporate responsibility. It helps to put a bit of colour to it, so you know what it is we mean. And we've got a corporate responsibility strategy. It's available on our website. It's really centred on 3 simple themes. So if you look at those bars across the bottom there, it's zero carbon airport. So it's about our environmental impacts and how we manage those. The orange bar there is opportunity for all. It's about how we see that the social and economic benefits of the airport fall locally, and that local people share in the success of the airport. And the blue bar there we call local voices, which is actually listening particularly to local communities, hearing and understanding their priorities and responding to them. So those are the broad themes we follow. If I just take 30 seconds to give a little bit of sort of detail to illustrate what we mean by that. I don't know if you're aware, but East Midlands was actually the first carbon neutral airport in the UK in 2012. So it's been carbon neutral for over a decade. We made a commitment to drive out the emissions from the airport operation as early as 2006-07. So we've been at that a long time. That means we've reduced our emissions by around about 90%. And the 10% that are left, those residual emissions, what we said is we're looking to make the airport net zero no later than 2038. And the emissions that are left are the ones that have been, until quite recently, really more difficult to eliminate, particularly diesel from vehicles and gas using the heating systems in the terminal. So we've got now a plan to phase those out and to get as close to an absolute zero as we can. So if that's a sort of green zero carbon bit, on the opportunity for all, again, I'm not sure councillors are aware, but we've got a couple of important facilities at the airport. We've got Starting Young and Aerozone. It's an education centre. We bring young people in. We teach them about airport operations, about the world of work, and increasingly about environmental impacts associated with aviation. We actually have cycled through the airport, anything up to about 3,500 young people a year come through and get a really good experience. So we think that's a really important thing to familiarise younger people with the airport. We've also got what we call Airport Academy. There are, we know, around the airport pockets, particularly in some communities, where there's quite ingrained worklessness and where people have found it for various reasons harder to get into the workplace. That was really the genesis of Airport Academy. So what we do is we work with Job Centre Plus and we work with local third sector organisations, and we take people who are currently out of work. We give them training, CV support, coaching and mentoring, and a sort of wraparound level of services they need. And having trained them, we then ensure they get an interview either with the airport company or one of the companies on the airport site. Most people that come through the training get placed. And across all 3 airports, we place more than 1,000 people into work through that way every year. So we're very keen to make sure that we draw from the local community and support the local community. And again, one headline almost hot off the press, really. We had an annual jobs event at the airport yesterday. It was quite difficult for us to manage, actually, because the capacity of the building is 1,500, but we had 1,625 people arrive, and we've got approximately 500 jobs on offer, and that's jobs in all sorts of different sectors, full-time, part-time, permanent, temporary, and we really think that the airport operation is quite unusual, that it has a really broad span of employment. So it needs people with very developed skills, and it needs people who have got really sort of entry-level and semi-skilled operations as well. So we think there's a job there for most people. So really pleased to have had such a good call to that yesterday. And then in local voices, noise a particular priority. I was just going to mention, though, the community fund. I know we mentioned it previously in the introduction, but the way the community fund works is that the airport, if you like, seeds that every year with a donation of £50,000. And then we've got various schemes where we police the way that aircraft operate. It's there really as a deterrent to make sure they operate in the way that our sort of noise abatement procedures work. If they don't, then they get a financial penalty. and rather than profit from that, we put that into the community fund, and then we donate that back to local good causes, and that's administered independently of us. But some pretty chunky numbers actually. If you look at that, the East Midlands Airport Community Fund has donated now £2.2 million to 1,770 local groups. So that's a fairly big investment. And I list there one or two that are particularly important locally. I don't know if you could slip down a slide. I'll let you read your way through that, but we've had a particular focus in the fund over the last year or so, where there are two things that we've prioritised. One, we had a low carbon energy fund. So if there were public buildings or charity organisations that would benefit from decarbonisation, we've provided grants to that. It's been particularly good to give donations, particularly for things like solar panels that not only reduce carbon, but actually reduce the operating costs of the facility as well. So we've had a focus on that. And we've also had a focus working with local schools, creating eco gardens as well. And again, West Bridgeford Junior School, we're one of the beneficiaries there with a £14,000 grant. But there's a real eclectic mix. Often the grants can be quite small. The organisations can be quite small. That's almost intentionally so, because although the grant's small, it's very meaningful to that organisation and tends to be almost like a patchwork quilt that we've built that over time. And it means that we've really got quite deep local connections in that. If you could flick down one more. The way that we manage noise, there are a whole portfolio of measures we take to sort of measure, monitor and control noise. I'll talk about one or two of them as we flick through the presentation tonight. But what I would say is we bring them all together in one place now, and they're all consolidated in our noise action plan. We review that every 5 years, and we've just been through a process to review that recently. So we pull together the noise controls that we're going to apply. We do a public consultation on them and take some feedback, and then we sort of, as it were, codify and bring them all together in the plan. And that gives us one place where we set out the controls we take, but also the programme of improvement we're going to make. So when we're talking about the MENT subcommittee, we'll be bringing that programme to the MENT subcommittee, and we'll be scrutinised there on the programme of work to make sure we deliver on the commitments that we made. So again, the plan's on the website. It's a good single source of information. And if we flick down the next few slides, I'll just illustrate some of the things in it and the measures we take to control noise. So we measure from radar where all the aircraft fly, we record that. We've got areas, particularly for departures, where it's stipulated they should fly. And if you look at the pictures, the green picture is a set of departing aircraft. The sort of reddy-orange colour is arriving aircraft. Straight away, you'll see that the green aircraft tend to concentrate a bit more. We're able to focus the departing aircraft on corridors, and we design those corridors to, insofar as we're able to avoid the main areas of population. And then we police how well the airlines fly within them as part of these sort of controls. And we actually publish those results again on our website. So it's transparent really as to which airlines do that particularly well and which find it a little bit harder. On arrivals, we tend to receive aircraft in a more sort of mixed pattern. So we're not able to concentrate them at the moment in the same way. The one change to that is that once they turn onto what's called final approach, which is the extended centre line of the runway, then at that point they're following what's called an instrument landing system. So they're guided into the airport very accurately, flying quite slowly and descending quite gradually. That's, you know, for obvious reasons, to make a stable, steady, safe landing. That does mean for about the last 6 to 8 miles, arriving aircraft are really very concentrated, particularly relevant here because they'll be turning onto that final approach around about East Leek, that sort of direction, when we're in a westerly operation. And we're in a westerly operation usually for about 80% of the time. So it's like the prevailing wind and our prevailing direction of operation. So we have these sort of tools available. And one thing I would say is we also make those radar recordings now publicly available through what's called WebTrack. So anyone can go onto our website, dial in a time and see the aircraft flying and see what the aircraft type was, what airline was flying it, how high it was and how noisy it was. So we make all that information transparent. And we're looking to upgrade that system actually to make it more accessible and put some more information out as part of the noise action plan that we've just published. Just flick down one more. I mentioned noise monitoring. The big red stars are the locations where we've got fixed noise monitors around the airport. They're broadly in two sorts of locations. They're either at about 6,500 meters under the centre line of the departure routes. That sounds like a very specific point, because it is, because we know that the aircraft, when they're certified, they have their noise measured at that location. So we measure in practice to see that in practice the noise is as it should be on the certificate. So that's why we have those noise monitors located there. And if it's not, that's where we have a system of noise penalties to fine aircraft that are excessively noisy. And then what we've built up with over the years is some noise monitors that aren't at those special locations, but they're in the nearest local villages. So we've built that up incrementally. We've got a noise monitor in Kegworth, in Castle Donington, in Melbourne, and just at the top there of Sutton Bonington as well. So we've got noise monitors in local communities. What we've also got is mobile noise monitoring equipment, and we're keen to get that into the community because there's clearly a limited number of locations we can measure at any one time. So we've got some mobile equipment, and we've got a program where we take that equipment out and do monitoring in particular communities, often upon request. So again, I make that offer this evening. If there are particular areas that your constituents would like us to go and have a look at the noise climate and measure noise, aircraft noise, then again, if you let us know, that we'll put that into the program, or we'll make that part of a coordinated program of work. Again, if you could just flick down one more. In terms of some new actions that we've built into the plan this time around, if you forgive me the technology, this or terminology, the noise for an aircraft is measured often according to a rating scale. So it's what's called QC, stands for quota count. It's really just a banding. So the very noisiest aircraft we wouldn't have operating anywhere really in service these days. Something like Concorde would be a QC 16. You then step down in a half each time. So it's QC 16, 8, 4, 2, 1, half and a quarter. Those are all the various bands. And so what we've done at East Midlands is we banned QC 16 aircraft some years ago. We banned QC 8 aircraft a few years ago. In the latest plan, we've gone further and we've banned QC 4 aircraft. So typical QC 4 aircraft would be the wide body aircraft used by the freight organisation, 747-400 series being the most popular. They're four-engine, large and relatively noisy. And actually we thought we wouldn't get them in large numbers at East Midlands, and we'd already put, in terms of our charges, a deterrent in place to try and ensure we didn't. We were a little bit surprised. And what happened is that, as Johan mentioned, when we had the pandemic and COVID restrictions, there was a big upsurge in demand for freighters, and there was a limited number of aircraft they could secure. So they secured aircraft, but they tended to be the older wide bodies. And so for a period of time, we had an uptick in those aircraft operations. What we've done is agreed to phase out voluntarily with the airlines, so they've phased them out of their own volition, but we've put a ban into the plan to make sure that can't recur, so they can't come back. So we ban those QC4 aircraft. What we've also done is we look at our charges, because we've got a variable charging system. So put very simply, if you've got an aircraft that flies at night, you'll pay more to fly at night than in the daytime, because we'd prefer you to fly in the daytime because it's a lower risk of causing disturbance. If you've got a noisy aircraft, you'll pay more to fly with a noisy aircraft. So if you want to fly a noisy aircraft at night, you'll pay a double surcharge in effect. And we do that to make sure that the aircraft at night are the ones that genuinely really have to fly at night. It's not solely freight aircraft, it's passengers too, but predominantly more freight aircraft would fly at night than the passengers. And it tends to be the nature of the freight operation we've got at East Midlands, which is the express couriers, people like DHL and UPS. And what their business model requires is they deliver from one business at the end of a business day. They deliver it to their customer business at the start of the next business day. They make their pickups as late as possible because that's a competitive point between them. And you can guess what happens. They have to fly overnight. But it does mean that you tend to get a pattern of operation where they fly more at night in midweek, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. They'll fly relatively light overnight at the weekend for the simple reason that most businesses work Monday to Friday. And if they can transport their parcels in a cheaper way, they certainly will. So they'll truck them over the weekend, but they'll fly them more during the week because they have to fly to meet the exacting deadlines of their customers. So we've got that variable charging scheme. Aircraft jet training has been particularly difficult actually for complaints. It seems to cause more complaints proportionately than the number of movements would suggest. We've progressively brought in restrictions on training aircraft over the years, and we've tightened them periodically as we've gone along. We've tightened them again, actually, in the plan this time around, the noise action plan. What we now say, we started with saying no training at night. We then said no training on Sundays and public holidays. We then said no training at weekends. We've now gone as far as to say it's only weekdays, it's only based operators, and it can only take place between those hours, a 4-hour slot in the morning and 6-hour slot in the afternoon. So again, we're trying to limit the periods when it happens so it becomes more predictable and more contained. We've got a sound insulation grant scheme. I think we recognise that, you know, despite our best endeavours, for those people who live particularly close to the airport, there's still a significant noise load. And so what we have is a sound insulation grant scheme. It provides grants of up to £10,000, depending on where you live, to provide mostly windows, but it's windows, doors and loft insulation in the main to protect those people from noise. We've run that for a while. We've run it actually for looking at that for more than 20 years, because what we've done this time around is recognise that those people that got a grant first time around are probably looking at their windows thinking that actually they're probably ready for a replacement. So we've opened the scheme again to those people, say if they want to come for a second grant, they can do that. So we've opened that scheme up. And we've also, in looking at the contributions we make both to the community fund and to that sound insulation grant scheme, I think the thought entered our mind more in the last 12 months because of how inflation has really sort of raced away. But we put now an RPI uplift in that so that the grants that we provide will maintain their real value. They won't be eroded by inflation over time. So those are some of the new actions that we've put into the plan. And my last couple of slides, I'll move on and sort of introduce this airspace project. And say part of my job is I'm the programme director for our future airspace programme. Essentially what we're going through across the UK is a project of modernisation. So much as aircraft are operated very safely and some of the technology is very sophisticated, the technology that underpins the current routing arrangements in the UK has been around a long time. It's based really on radio beacons that are ground-based. And what we've got and had for a little while now is essentially the modern jetliners that fly have got very accurate GPS satellite guidance on board, but they're not allowed to use the full functionality of it because of the way the system is structured. So we're moving to a system where we're going to switch off the old radio navigation aids and we're going to use the much more sophisticated equipment on board the aircraft. That means that aircraft can fly much more consistently, predictably, accurately. We think it offers benefits that we can get the system to work much more efficiently and drive down fuel burn and emissions. We think there are also choices about routes, and we should be able to realise some noise benefits as well in the round from the programme. So we're working our way through that. We're not doing that in isolation. All airports across the UK are doing that, and we're doing it in a coordinated way with other airports. And there's a national coordinating body, it's rather imaginatively called the Airspace Change Organising Group, or ACOG, and they work with all of the airports to help the proposals come together in a sort of proper, coordinated, sensible way. And the aim of it, as I say, if we're getting a sentence on that bottom bit, is quicker, quieter, and cleaner journeys. But I suppose one of the things I would say, and it helps actually, flick down to the final slide. One of the things I would say is that because the aircraft have got, when we use their technology, they're able to do more things. It presents us with more choices. And so if we're going to make choices about where aircraft fly, if we've got more choices, and if we're going to choose the degree to which they concentrate and in what areas, we can't really do that on our own in isolation. We've got to do that in partnership with the people who've got a stake in it, and that is particularly local communities. So we consult at various stages through this process to make sure that we understand the views of a whole range of stakeholders, from the very technical, like the airlines themselves and air traffic controllers and commercial operations, through to the consultative committee and actually local communities. And the process we follow is a pretty staged, difficult and onerous one, but rightly so. And it's organised by the Civil Aviation Authority, and it's set out in that flowchart to the right. So there are really 4 substantive stages before we've got a final proposal. We start by talking to stakeholders to agree what's called design principles. They're the big guiding principles that decide what we're going to give weight to in the design process. We've been through that, and we've done that process, and we've agreed design principles, and we've got those approved by the CAA. So we've passed that first stage 1 gateway. What we've then done is we've been through a process of looking at what all the available routes are that we could design, and we've tested that in a couple of ways with stakeholders to test what is essentially a long list. Having done that, we've then done a first screen and got down to a shorter list. So we've now got a more manageable number of routes that we think have got some merit and we're going to look at in more detail. And before we can go any further with that, we then have to get a second gateway approval from the CAA, and we've done that too. So we've made some decent progress on this. What we're now doing, and we'll be doing over the course of this year, is 2 things really. The first is we're making sure that the short list of options we've got fit neatly or comfortably with other airports. So our biggest relationship will be with Birmingham and Manchester. We need to make sure we don't put routes in place that can't fit, almost akin to a jigsaw, that we've got pieces that can fit together comfortably. And I think we're comfortable we can do that in East Midlands. And the second thing we're doing once we're through that is we're doing a much more detailed analysis of all of the implications of the routes we've got, so that we can propose some options in terms of the best operating networks. And when we get to that point, we've got a really defined set of proposals, and then we'll do a really big wide-scale public consultation, probably around the springtime of 2025, I think. But we'll consult them with local communities and other interested stakeholders, and we'll look to devise an operating network that strikes the best balance between the interests we get. And I think we've all looked at this long enough to realise that there's no perfect system. There's no way in which we can organise aircraft so they don't have any noise impact. There's no way we can organise them, they don't burn fuel and create emissions, but it's trying to get a balance between the different interests. So we'll be doing a big public consultation on that. And having done that, we'll then submit to the CAA for effectively permission to implement. And the programme we've got is that we would implement alongside other airports in our region, which is Leeds, Bradford, East Midlands, Liverpool and Manchester, and we'd deploy a whole coordinated package in the winter of 27-28. So that's the programme we've got at the moment. So it's a big, difficult, complicated programme, but we've made some good progress on it already, and I think we're much clearer about what the options are that we'll be taking forward now. So I hope that covers quite a lot of ground, but I hope it gives you a feel for how we manage this, the measures we're taking around noise, and why the airspace programme is particularly important and how far we've got with it. So that's the slides that we've got.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll open it up to councillors to ask any questions. Councillor Thomas.
Yes, thank you. I'm the councillor, one of the councillors for Leek Ward, which covers East Leek and West Leek, and I put up this scrutiny matrix really for one. Well, the reason being that I've been to some of the consultations in the early stages of the future airspace plan, and some of the options could lead to more noise, not just for our ward, but other areas of Rushcliffe that perhaps don't get it, because some of the flight paths are sort of curling round in different ways. My particular concern, I think, for our ward, we're getting the landing traffic 80% of the time, come what may, really, because that you're not going to move the runways. When the airport's operating the other way, and the planes are taking off to the east, there was a new possibility of a route that went directly to the east, and I think that one would have a potential impact on our area and possibly areas further out, because at the moment we don't get planes taking off over our area. So that would be one particular concern. But I'd seen that there's kind of coming in and going out all directions, and I think Rushcliffe needs to understand what the impact would be. So that's why I put the scrutiny matrix in, really. And two other things, really. One is there's a lot of house building going on in East Leek in particular, but other areas under the flight path as well. And it's about building standards underneath the flight paths. There's quite a lot that can probably be done to lessen the impact, and to get it in at the point when the houses are built is probably a good thing. I mean, if you're going to impact people with aircraft noise, it's probably better that you don't put them under the flight path. But if you're going to, then whatever you can do at the building stage in terms of requirements for different standards for houses that are being built there would be good. So some discussion about that really. But also the grants probably don't go out as far as us, and for noise reduction methods. We get quite a lot of complaints, where I am about the aircraft noise, but we also get a lot of people saying, typically the people that are moving into the new houses notice it when they get there, and they've got their nice new shiny house, and all of a sudden they get there and they've got all the aircraft noise, and they put comments up on Facebook, and the normal retorts from the residents are, well, you get used to it after a while, which is possibly true, but not necessarily something that you should, encourage. And the other comment they get is, well, why did you buy a house here if you don't like the aircraft noise? And none of which helps these people really. So those are the sorts of issues that brought me to raise the scrutiny matrix really. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'll come back on some of those points if I can. There's quite a lot of ground there and some really good points actually. I think the first headline, I'd say you're quite right that there are a wide range of options we've considered in the airspace programme so far, and there's routes in all manner of directions, and some of them look quite radically different to what we've got right now. Partly why we've done that is because we have to. We're obliged by the Civil Aviation Authority process to draw up what they call a comprehensive list of options. So we almost have to start with a clean sheet and say, where could we possibly conceivably design routes? In some ways, we were hoping to explain as we went through the process, the fact we've drawn a line doesn't mean it's necessarily got any merit and it's going to go through the process, but we've got to start with it. So I would definitely say engage in the process, and the council and councillors should be looking at the work that we're doing. It's all published on the CAA portal. I can certainly provide links following the meeting if it helps. So all of the documents that we've got are all published on the portal, and we are actually just now in the next coming weeks holding some information sessions so people can come along either virtually or in person and see the routes that we are shortlisting, the ones we think have got more merit and so are more likely to carry on. But definitely take a look at that. At the moment, you're quite right. The burden of aircraft is more arriving than departing. So if you look at somewhere like Eastleigh, then when we're departing, the aircraft turn south or north before they get to Eastleigh, so you don't get directly overflown. That arrangement works pretty well. I can't prejudge it, but certainly that seems to be an arrangement that works pretty well. So I guess that's one of the things we'll consider when we come to the networks. But the overflight of arriving aircraft, it's one of the more difficult bits really, because we have to, although we've got more choices, we have to still manage expectations, and that accident of geography where if you extend the centre lines of the runway by about 6 to 8 miles at any of the major UK airports, you'll see they all operate in pretty much exactly the same way, that the aircraft fly a nice steady slow descent. So if Eastleigh happens to be there as an accident of geography, then it's still going to get overflown by arriving aircraft now and in the future. That is something that we're conscious of. Albeit that the aircraft that fly over there get, over the years, incrementally quite a lot better. So I've been around East Midlands and aviation for quite a while, and the aircraft types we've got now are substantially quieter than they were, which is, that direction of travel is going to continue. You mentioned about building standards as well. This is something that I think we're, unsurprisingly, very keen on as well. So if you look at our sound insulation grant scheme, it does actually have a cut-off. So your house has to be built before a certain year. I can't remember what it is, but it's something like in the 1990s. And I think the reason we do that is we expect anyone that builds a new house in a high noise area thereafter to build it to a high standard and insulate it, and they absolutely should. It shouldn't be for them to build in a high noise area and then the airport comes along later and has to insulate it. We've not seen as much government guidance in this area as I think we'd like. And the guidance got weakened quite a lot actually under the David Cameron government. And if you look at, not necessarily around East Midlands, but if you look at the UK as a whole, what we're seeing in the forecast is that the noise footprint, as it were, around airports over time is likely to continue to shrink a little. But although it shrinks, the number of people affected is forecast to increase, and that's because people are forecast to build houses in high noise areas around airports. And we really think there should be some planning guidance to limit that in particularly noisy areas. And if people are going to build areas, then at minimum they should be really well insulated. So we do what we can as part of the planning process to spot those developments and to comment to the planning authority. But we really look to planning authorities and local councils to have planning guidance in place that assures that not just for airports but for any noise source. It seems a really sensible measure. I mentioned in the slides we do have this sound insulation grant scheme. I think from memory, I'm picturing the boundary it comes close to, but I don't think it does go quite as far as East Leek. It's always difficult when you've got a scheme to draw a boundary, because there's always a point at which you stop providing support. The way that we do it is we've got 3 boundaries of support. So those closest to the airport, it's a £10,000 grant. Those a bit further out, it's a £5,000 grant. A bit further still, it's a £3,000 grant. And then unfortunately there comes a boundary at which we stop supporting. And we base that on the noise footprint of the airport. So we base it on what's called the 55 decibel noise contour. I suppose what I would say in sort of providing a bit of context is that it's the lowest noise level of any airport that has a sound insulation grant scheme. So we already have a boundary that's the lower noise level than other airports. Although I think I'd be probably a bit disingenuous in not saying that should be the case, because primarily we're insulating to protect people from night noise, and people are more susceptible to noise at night, and most of the airport schemes are more targeted at daytime noise. So I think it's right that we do that. And I guess it's always something we keep under review. We've reopened it for new grants again. We haven't looked at the boundary this time around. I would never say never, but I think it's quite an undertaking for the airport to resource that already. I think we've invested, substantially. It's been a really big multi-million-pound investment in that. And certainly we'll keep it under review. And certainly as the flight pass may change under the airspace programme, if that leads to different people experiencing noise, then certainly what we'll look to do is make sure that we get the sound insulation scheme adjusted, hopefully ahead of any changes that are made, so we can do the right thing by people and see their properties are insulated. And the only last bit I was going to say is in terms of complaints. I mean, complaints are always really useful because they're really helpful feedback. We analyse and respond to each complaint, but we do consider them. We share them with the consultative committee, but we consider them internally as well to see if there are patterns on what it's telling us. They can be helpful. They can be a bit misleading as well. I mean, sometimes we find that we need to look in the round at both numbers of complaints and the pattern of where people are complaining from. Some people find aircraft noise really very difficult to live with, and they complain really very frequently. Some people are acclimatised to aircraft noise, it seems, and live really close to the airport, and it really genuinely doesn't trouble them, and all spectrum in between. But generally, level of complaints at the airport has certainly stabilised a lot. It's come down a lot actually in recent years. And from this sort of area, I mean, from memory, I don't think we get actually very many noise complaints reported to us from that sort of East Leek area. Yeah, I mean, I think single figures, one. So, that I wouldn't want that to make it seem that we're complacent and think there's not people who are experiencing aircraft noise and find it difficult. I'm sure there are, and I'm sure we do lots of community outreach. So we do. It's one of the reasons we do it is we genuinely talk to people and hear what their experiences are. And we'll get a wide range. And I think a lot of people do just get used to the airport and it being there, but not everybody, so I think there's a range of stuff. But we do work on bringing that noise down, and the quieter aircraft help, and the procedures help, and the processes we've got that help. That doesn't mean there's not a problem for some people. I think we absolutely accept that.
Yeah, I think I take the point that people don't necessarily complain, but people don't necessarily complain to the right people, do they? And we have this with everything, you know, fly tipping and littering and everything else. You know, people complain perhaps to us, or they complain on Facebook, and we can carry on publicising the correct way of raising the issue. We can do that. But I think, Chair, it would be quite good if this group could send a comment, a recommendation back to the local plan procedure, you know, so that consideration is given on policies about noise insulation in areas where it's relevant to the aircraft noise. When we come to put together the next version of the local plan, and to talk to the airport people, so that you know, we can have realistic noise insulation in new homes. So I would put that as a possible recommendation from this discussion. Thank you.
Is that okay? Because what I would say, we can't necessarily, you know, solve everybody's complaint, because sometimes people are disturbed by an aircraft. It's a perfectly normal aircraft operates in a normal way, so it's not always a perfect resolution. But complaints do drive the actions we take in the noise action plan. I mentioned training aircraft. That's probably the most recent example. But if you look at how we've moved on training aircraft over the years, I mean, it was that because we've got very sophisticated landing systems of a modern standard East Midlands, and the runway's busy, but it's not as busy as some of the bigger London airports. We used to have a lot of training movements, and airlines who were based at Heathrow in particular would fly up to East Midlands and do their crew training at East Midlands. We charged for all that activity, so it was a good source of revenue actually as well for the airport. But in response to the complaints that we got, we thought that probably we shouldn't be taking that sort of traffic. So for quite a long time now, we banned training by airlines that aren't based at East Midlands. We only allow it. So that was a big step for us. The first time we turned traffic away in response to complaints. We then, let's say, tried to narrow down to protect the times that people felt were most sensitive. So we said no night training, then we said no evening training because children going to bed and such like. We've shrunk the days of the week so that we only allow it weekdays and in those narrower windows. And we've also looked at the circuits that they fly, whether it's left hand or right hand, to try and get those circuits in areas where it's less likely to overfly people. So we've set a sort of corridor up, and we measure how well they do that, and we report that again back to the airlines and sort of police how well they do that. Because really, as far as the training aircraft are concerned, what they really want to practice most is that stable, slow, safe landing. So they'll land and then they'll take off again. And what they'd like to do is turn as soon as possible and do it again. What we do is make them go a little bit further out, and then we can turn them in a wider arc to miss places like Castle Donington or Weston-on-Trent, or as they come back, to hopefully get them turned in before Eastleigh. But we've done all of that in response to complaints and other areas where we've been able to amend our practices to sort of make good in response to what we've heard. So it's not that we're completely deaf to it, it's just that sometimes we're quite limited in what we can do.
Yeah, just I don't want to labour the point on complaints, but as you know, Jeff sort of looks after our environmental health department, and one of the areas they do deal with complaints. I was speaking to one of Jeff's colleagues who's been at the council probably 20 years, and he was saying when he first started, he did used to receive quite a lot of complaints about noise. I think it's probably fair to say, Jeff, that we just do not receive complaints as a local authority about noise at the moment. That probably doesn't help, that you're probably still getting stuff locally and on Facebook and stuff, but as a council, we just don't receive them.
So should they be complaining to the council, or should they be complaining to the airport, or should they be complaining to both?
Either or both, I would suggest. I mean, if it was come through to ourselves, we have no legal controls to deal with aircraft noise at all, unlike noise nuisance from domestic or business premises. So, but that said, if we were receiving complaints, we would refer and consult with the airport.
Certainly, from our point of view, if there's a complaint about aircraft noise, we'd like it to come to the airport because we'd like to know about it, and we'd like to, you know, to see how people are feeling and engage it. So I think if I were a member of the public, I'd probably be doing is, if I'd got a complaint, I'd come to the airport, you can see our prominent on the website, you can see the email address. Most people use email to complain these days, and we still have phone lines and letters. Most people use an email. But if I remember the public, I'd probably complain to the airport. If I felt the airport wasn't, responsibly dealing with my complaint, then I might escalate it to my local councillor. But I think the overall pattern of complaints and who's complaining where and what they're complaining about and what we're doing about it, really that's in part why we've got the consultative committee, and the role that you guys are playing is that we don't just receive the complaints, we analyse them, we give quite detailed statistical reports and plans and maps. We share all that with the consultative committee. And one of the good things about the consultative committee is we've intentionally got those different constituencies. We've got local councillors, we've got the airlines who are flying the aircraft, and local community, particularly local community campaign groups as well. And we bring them all together because the best thing they can do is all talk to each other. In many ways, we're the sort of broker of the conversation rather than holding all the solutions. And it's been quite a powerful exercise over the years, I must say, for the airlines to talk directly to the community groups and understand each other. Communities understanding why they do what they do, and airlines understanding the implications of what their operations cause. So that's been really quite a powerful exercise.
Can I just ask a question, just following on with that and the local engagement? And you're saying you got about the mobile equipment that can be put out and the request. Do you go out to the local parishes and kind of say to them, would they like to have this kind of equipment in there? And if they're getting, as a parish council, experiencing a lot of issues and noise issues, because again, it's like one of the things that's been said is the relevant people might not get in the complaints and the noise and the complaints about the noise. And as it's been alluded to, often people go on social media and complain and vent their frustration on it, but don't actually tell necessarily the relevant people to make those and to take action. Do you then can go to the parishes and how does that work? And then can you just explain about how people can request that in equipment?
I'll answer that one today. I was only on the telephone to somebody at the airport today about following the complaints procedure and requesting noise monitors. It's done through the local parish council. If the parish council or town council go to the airports and make the request for a noise monitor, and then that will start the process off.
So they can request it, but
Yeah.
are they kind of
the
offered as well?
The information is on the website, on the communities, and there's an email address on there. Most parish councils will have an email address for the community connection at the airport.
Okay.
And do it that way, and then it will be followed up. For example, it's a request at the moment from Westleek but unfortunately, because of the close proximity to the one at St Bonington, it's not possible to put one in Westleek because it's within a certain parameters of it. So their request was not taken up, but that's the way to do it.
I was going to say, part of my team is deliberately a community engagement team. So I think you're probably referring to Colleen Hempson.
Yeah.
She's our community engagement manager. She's fantastic. She's been around East Midlands for a long time. One of the things Colleen does is she physically goes to local parish council meetings just on a regular basis to hear the local agenda and update them and keep them appraised of what's happening at the airport. So the offer will be part of that local parishes will be familiar with it. We also do a programme of community outreach. So we literally go out and talk to people and let them know what's happening at the airport and sort of press the flesh as to what's happening. We used to do that more just to sort of take a venue like this, open the doors and let people come talk to us. What we found over time is that people stopped coming to see us. There weren't that many people coming through the door, so we still do that. But actually what we're keen to do now is we take the outreach out to areas where there's quite heavy footfall, be it sort of village fetes, garden centres or whatever, so we can meet people who weren't necessarily making a special trip to see us, but we talk about the airport generally. And again, we just try and make sure that we publish a little bit of what we do, but make that offer that if there are particular concerns, sometimes monitoring noise can be part of helping that conversation on so we can understand what's happening.
Councillor Pratt, you're next on my list.
Thank you. I've got a few questions. In one of your slides, you mentioned about the Q16, Q8, Q4 flights and that you put a ban on them.
Yeah.
But you're also working with airlines to kind of them reducing those flights on a voluntary basis. So the question I had is, are there time scales for those airlines? Like, is there a deadline that by a certain in the next few years or in the next year, they do need to stop using those flights at those particular times? My second question was about the sound insulation grant scheme. So the slide mentioned that it would be for residents who applied 20 years ago. Would it also be applicable to any new residents who have moved in the area and hadn't applied the grant 20 years ago? My third question is about how much contribution has increased to the EMF fund? What's the current contribution and what's the increase? And my fourth question is in terms of complaints, we heard a lot about complaints today. And what I wanted to know that does this EMA keep a record of these complaints, and is it shared? Are those number of complaints they've received, are they shared with the council? So there is some kind of data also maintained by the council to kind of indicate that yes, these are the complaints, because at the minute it seems Rushcliffe has not received any complaints. Councillor Thomas is saying people are venting on Facebook. And you've said that it's best to come to the airport, and in the midst of all of that, it seems that there is no kind of record, no kind of data, and it's not very clear how could we get that data, because that's very important. So is that shared with the council, and what actions is EMA undertaking if there are complaints made in the future? Thank you.
Again, quite a few good points in there, but if I come back to it. I'll talk about sound insulation grant scheme first, because that's the easiest question. We've got good records of where we've done works and what grants we've paid out, and the grants associated with the property. So if somebody lives in a property that hasn't previously claimed, then they're eligible straight away for a grant. They don't have to wait. They join the installation straight away. The time span is just simply for a second grant, that once we've insulated a house, obviously we wouldn't want to go back too quickly and re-insulate it again. So that's a relatively easy one. In terms of the quota counts and the noisier aircraft and the rankings, I should have made clear actually that the bands I was talking about are nighttime bands rather than daytime bands. Sorry, I should have made that particularly clear. So we're just sensitive to the fact that people are more likely to be disturbed at noise at night. But those bands, the QC 16, 8 and 4, they're now in place. So there won't be any of those aircraft fly at night from now. And that's a permanent ban. And over time, the move is to get progressively quieter aircraft. We see the airlines investing heavily in that. I mean, the biggest passenger airline, East Midlands Ryanair, have bought another 330 new aircraft from Boeing. So there's a big order, and we see the benefit of that come through. And over time, we've seen it over the years, really, that the aircraft have progressively got through the generations to be more modern, and each generation tends to be more fuel efficient and is significantly quieter. So we're pleased to see that and to drive that behaviour through the charges that we put in place to play our part in it, as it were. In terms of then the complaints, I maybe again can share the link afterwards, but one of the things that we're very keen with all of the environmental monitoring information we do is just think everyone benefits from transparency. So any data or numbers or complaints or that, we're perfectly happy to share it, and we do that as a point of policy, really. So if you're looking at first, I mean that web track system where we publish the radar recordings and you can see where the aircraft fly and stuff, that's pretty standard now. You'll find most major airports in the UK do it, but East Midlands was the first. And we did that because it just helps us have a much better conversation with people, because if we talk to people and we're disagreeing about what aircraft it was and how high the aircraft was and how many there were, well, we're not having a proper quality conversation. If we can get all that agreed, because it's just a statement of fact, then we can have a better conversation. So in noise complaints, we do publish reports, and I would be reasonably confident that they're on the website already. But again, I can double check that for the committee if I can loop back.
They're actually under the committee meeting,
Okay,
minutes
so
of the meeting on the website of
yeah.
the communities.
Yeah. So again, we'd sort of go through it and analyse it with the consultative committee, and along with the package of papers that goes there, we'd make that available. So it is all on the website. And again, it's just a matter of policy that it does us no benefit to have numbers that we don't share. So all of it can be out there, and it helps people get more informed. And when they're more informed, we tend to have, as I say, a much better, more constructive conversation.
Just thank you for that. And just one more question about the East Midlands EMA fund. What's the current fund and how much more have increased?
Yeah, I say sorry. The fund actually, it's a £50,000 seeding that we do every year as the airport company. That's our donation. That £50,000 has been static for quite a long time, and if I think about that, it's probably uprating it wasn't at the front of our minds until the last 12 months. And actually, when we saw a sudden flash of inflation, we almost had a sort of self-realization that actually the real value of that's become eroded. So we've put an uplift in that, so it'll be uplifted with RPI from here on. What I would say is that gets topped up by the fines and surcharges and penalties we have. So in recent years, I say we banned the QC4 aircraft. Over the COVID years, we saw an upsurge of them. We'd put a financial deterrent in place, which we thought would be sufficient to prevent them operating. It was £5,000 per movement. Because of the particular unique circumstances, it clearly wasn't sufficient at that time. And I think most people were sympathetic to the fact that there was just a really difficult time, and there was a need to ship a lot of that freight, included things like medical equipment and PPE and other stuff. But it did mean that every movement had to pay £5,000 into the community fund. So the revenues of the fund were really very healthy indeed. We've seen hundreds of thousands of pounds into the fund, and the fund is in rude health right now. It's always a bit of a mixed blessing that we won't see those aircraft anymore and we ban them. So to prevent noise, that's a very good move, and in the round, the right thing to do. But it does mean that the community fund's not as well resourced as it was. It was very well resourced the last couple of years. Much to the pain of the airlines, of course, because they're having to pay considerable sums of money to fly the aircraft.
So how much is the current increase then? Because you said 50,000 was the current fund and you're increasing it. So what I want to know is how much is the increase?
Yeah, so I think the balance of the fund at the moment is of the order of £250,000. We will pay £50,000 plus an RPI uplift. I don't know what month we've taken as being the RPI, but a bit like the government with public benefits, we'll take a particular month every year and then we uprate it with the RPI at that point in time.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Most of my questions actually you have answered, but in terms of the community fund again, is that sort of publicised in the same way as Andy was talking about in terms of parish councils, community groups, etc.? And does that really get out to everyone, do you think, who actually obviously is suffering from the noise element of it?
Yeah, I mean, the community fund, we're obviously keen to promote the community fund and make sure people know about it. So it's been around for quite a while. I mean, it's clearly the information's all available on our website, and we promote it when we have all of our community outreach. But that's inevitably still quite a limited audience. But what we also do is we do what we call community flyer. It's our community magazine. In years gone by, it used to be a printed magazine that we do, and we distribute that and make the community fund a really prominent part of that. From memory, that was about 40,000 homes. We did that too for quite a few years. It's now an electronic magazine. I don't know what the distribution is, the exact number, but again, it's still quite a chunky and sizable distribution from that. It's just that we have to get in the modern way of GDPR, we have to get people's permission to send it to them. But we do always promote that community flyer in all of our outreach, and we try and build it up as much as we can. And we, Johan and his team to the media and social media, it's the sort of thing that from time to time will feature in the communications we're putting out. if the test is, do we get a good call for grants and is it well distributed, then I'd be really comfortable with that. I think we get grants from across the area and we get really a pretty healthy application rate. You know, we get quite a lot of people approaching us for stuff. It's good that we've been able to, in recent years, with a sort of healthy, healthy level of funds, we've been able to pay out some bigger grants than we ordinarily would as well, some really quite sizable grants. So that's been a really nice thing to do. And, you know, some of the things we've done, you know, being able to put solar panels on a hospice is a really great project because actually it's reducing carbon emissions. It's reducing the operating costs of something that's giving a really great public service, and it's something that we'd really like to support. So, community fund will definitely continue to invest in, and it's just a really good program to have.
Okay. In terms of the community fund, majority is made up of fines and whatever. What would those funds be consistent amongst similar size airports? I mean, I presume they vary if you're coming into Heathrow or Stansted and you don't comply with things, or is it? You don't know.
Yeah, I only know about our own airports actually, and most airports now have a community fund. I guess it would probably be a reasonable assumption, though it is only an assumption, that it would be bigger for bigger airports because they've got bigger means. So at Manchester, our contribution is £100,000, but then Manchester Airport is 4 times bigger than East Midlands. At Stansted, actually, I know we've just made a recent increase, actually. So we have increased the contribution there, but that until recently was 50,000. So it was until recently comparable to East Midlands. And much like Sound Insulation Scheme, I guess it's reasonable for us to, keep it under review, and depending upon the resources of the airport and the overall health of the fund, to take a view as to whether the degree to which we support it.
In the report that we got from the Borough Council, one of the points which I just hit me was that it said 3.2, paragraph 3.2, the number of flights agreed when permission is given for building or expansion of an airport. Oh, sorry, the number of flights is agreed when permission is given for the building or the expansion of the airport. So when would that, obviously East Midlands expanded from when it first started out. So how long ago was that? And does that mean that the number of flights is agreed then, and it's not looked at until you get more expansion or whatever?
Yeah, so the noise controls, the sort of regulated noise controls, they come from 2 different sources. They either come through the land planning system and the local planning authority, or they can come directly from the Department for Transport, imposed by the Secretary of State. Now, as it stands, the Secretary of State only imposes controls at 3 airports, and that's Heathrow, Gatwick and Stansted, the London airports. Every other airport in the UK, if it has controls, they're agreed to the land planning system, to the local planning authority. It doesn't necessarily always regulate the number of movements. It depends on what conditions the planning authority put on. So at East Midlands, the principal control is to control night noise, because that was felt to be the most sensitive bit. But rather than controlling the number of movements, it controls the amount of noise we're allowed to make. So there's a noise footprint around the airport. It's expressed as what's called a noise contour. It's a bit like a sort of weather map where you get an ISO bar, you got a line of noise, and there's an area around the airport, and we have to, in all eventualities, always ensure that our noise is less than we're permitted by that. So annually we calculate it, we report that to local planning authority and the consultative committee, and we sort of monitor how that changes over time. So that's where the control comes from, and that's actually attached to a planning permission for a runway extension. Was the last one at East Midlands. I wouldn't know the year, but I would guess it's probably about 10 years ago, I would have thought, from memory. But if we were to bring forward an expansion of East Midlands for passengers, freight or aircraft parking, then there'd be an opportunity as part of that, if that was going to change the number of aircraft, the local authority to impose new or different conditions. That'd be part of the process.
Councillor Barney.
Thank you. Just wanted to make a couple of comments, and I've got one quick question as well. First of all, when I made my declaration of interest, I mentioned that it's my privilege to sit on the committee. Having been on it now since May 2021, I genuinely do mean that. It is a privilege to be part of the ICC, and I wanted to reflect to members here at Rushcliffe, well, we've got the airport here in company, actually, how seriously the airport take the ICC committee. It's a very odd group. It's a large group. There's we meet 4 times a year, quarterly meetings. They're long meetings. They can go on for 3 hours. And the committee is made up of representatives like myself, representing county councils, borough councils, but also some quite antagonistic groups who have serious gripes and axes to bear against the airport. And I have to say that the way the airport handles all of us collectively together, all of our different interests from different angles and different viewpoints, is quite extraordinary. And the time and the diligence that the airport put into the committee is actually extraordinary. It's not lip service by any degree, and everything that every member says is taken incredibly seriously. And I have seen the results of that in the last 2 years actually make substantive strategic changes in the way the airport operates locally, and I think it's to their credit. The current chief executive is a formidable gentleman, and it's astonishing to me, Steve Griffiths, that he actually attends all of the meetings and stays for the whole time of the committee. I think that reflects how seriously they take the independent consultative committee. So I think I wouldn't be alone in saying actually that those as well on the committee that have serious gripes to reflect would also make the same comments about how seriously the airport take their commitment to the ICC. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. I know they will pick me up on the next meeting if they do feel that is the case. So having given all that praise, I'd now like to speak as the local ward member who lives closest on Rushcliffe Borough Council to the airport, and acknowledge the thorough nuisance that the airport is to local communities. And my parents moved under the flight path in 1981, so I've lived under the flight path for most of my life since I was 6 years old and pretty close to it. And I've noted, having looked at my computer tonight, that we actually qualify for our window grant to be replaced. So I will be definitely inquiring onto that. But over the last 18 months, we've seen the Chapter 4 aircraft now reduced. The number of complaints I was receiving as county councillor and as borough councillor was exacerbated enormously during those COVID times with the 747-400 aircraft. And I have to, myself was woken up frequently, and my neighbours, and it was a thorough menace. But for some people, still, as Karis rightly indicated, aircraft noise is a serious, serious issue. And for those people like me that don't feel like I'm affected by it, don't notice it, for others, it's a serious concern, and we do get that. So again, we take that really, really seriously. And as such, obviously in my role as county councillor and representing Notts County Council, I can't be too parochial in my membership of the ICC, but I was really pleased recently, and I wanted members to know this. Councillor Rex Walker set up a group with his ward parishes before Andy Brown was also covering the same ward, 5 parish group. And we've recently welcomed onto the ICC the 5 parish group representative. So if members locally or your local residents have concerns, please know that you can go to the 5 parish group. They are a local representative who are now sitting on the committee and will take very seriously all complaints and concerns. They are advocating very strongly in terms of the training aircraft programs at the moment. And so there's a voice there that you can channel through your direct criticisms to, which will be absolutely heard on the ICC. And I'll be happy to connect you to that representative on the ICC. I've spoken more than enough, but my question was just about the self-interest declared, the sound insulation grant. When's that coming to a close so we can let all of our residents know locally? Thank you for listening to me go on so long.
And thank you for your comments about the consultative committee. As I say, we're not blind to the difficulties that the airport can present, particularly with night noise, particularly with, some of the congestion and intrusion, but it brings an awful lot too, that particularly that freight operation that we're working hard to control is a genuine national facility that really supports the national economy. East Midlands is a really big driver of local employment and local economic value. So, it is a balance to be struck, isn't it? I appreciate that. And we do take our obligations really seriously, and we do value the consultative committee. And, quite rightly, really, that Steve is the current managing director. I don't think he's missed a meeting in his tenure, actually, and he wouldn't, and he fields his senior team. So we get a director level team, including myself as a group director. I would attend every meeting as well. People in my team who've got more technical expertise would be there, and we do our level best to treat seriously the comments that we get. In terms of the sort of losing those noisier aircraft, I think one of the one of the things I did want to say with regard to those sort of QC4 aircraft is I think we've got in our airline community, partly because they've been as part of this discussion for a long time, I think they're really conscious of, let's say, the implications of their operations, and they're willing to come with us and to compromise. So those QC4 aircraft that are now banned, we've banned them really voluntarily because the airlines have agreed to do it, and we've worked with them through powers of discussion and persuasion. We've all agreed it's the right thing to do, and we've phased them out in a fairly short time window. If they hadn't agreed to do that, we could have forced them to do it, but only within bounds. We've got limited legal powers to do it. So if we'd had to force them to do it, it would have taken another 5 years minimum to do it. And so we wouldn't have the outcome that we've got now, which is a ban which is in force as of today. So I think working sort of voluntarily with the same objectives can often be a faster way to make some progress than necessarily trying to have a, powers of compulsion all the time. So I think we've learned that over time. And then in terms of that sound insulation grant scheme and the changes, they're all in force as of now because the noise action plan is now published, so it's live, and all of those changes have taken effect. So we're expecting to start getting a little uptick in the numbers of applicants for grants as of now. And Colleen and the team, when they go out there, we're making one of the messages when they do their community outreach.
Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask about the Freeport. So when the Freeport arrives, I presume that the airport have got plenty of capacity for the extra cargo coming in. But does that also mean that there'll be a lot of freight coming in and very little going out, or are we able to balance it so that the same amount of freight that's coming in is leaving the airport? Might there be larger planes, in which case more noise? And then just one other question I wanted to ask: if a flight path is changed, do you have to inform the insurers, because I believe they like to bump up premiums for people on flight paths? Thank you.
I'll take the Freeport bit of your question. You may find this surprising, actually, but we don't actually anticipate a great deal of increase in volume of freight because of the Freeport. The biggest benefit to the airport, the Freeport, is the tax site initiative. So the Freeport, the tax sites and customs zones, there are 3 tax sites in the East Midlands Freeport. One of them is the Rushcliffe and Power Station. There is some land on our airport estate and around the airport, and the 3rd tax site is a site near the Toyota factory in Derby. And the tax sites are a bit like the coalition's enterprise zone. There are incentives for businesses to set up and invest in those tax sites, so they are investment zones essentially. And I think that's the biggest beneficiary of the Freeport for the airport, is it makes it a more attractive proposition for investors. Now, who those investors will be is yet to be determined. There are conversations happening. There are investor inquiries being handled by the Freeport at the moment, both in terms of investing on the airport site itself, but also around the airport site. The only way that we would see a sudden upsurge in the volume of goods coming through the airport as a direct result of the tax site, if the inward investment into the tax sites were by advanced manufacturers or other businesses that needed to export or import goods. But until we know who those businesses are, there is no certainty, and it'd have to be an awful lot. And suddenly, production of products that need to be exported or imported would have to be, increased quite considerably before you'd see a knock-on effect to those. But every Freeport has to have a port, and because we're an inland port, the port is the airport. So that's the role we play in the Freeport. So I don't anticipate there being a sudden upsurge in the volume of goods coming through the airport as a direct result of the Freeport. We've just had some economic analysis done looking at the next sort of 20, 25 years of the airport. And if you look at the trajectory of growth over the cargo and the volumes over the last 20 years, it's incrementally gone up. We saw the peak in the pandemic. We expect it to continue incrementally going up. But the bigger driver for that is really the global economy. And also, if there is greater investment in this region, the biggest beneficiaries of the airport's cargo operation are advanced manufacturers, those who make parts that need to go around the world. And if this region is well known for them, so if the ecosystem continues to grow and develop, then businesses may be attracted to this region because they know they can get their goods to markets overseas. So the anticipation is there'll be a gradual increase, but not a sudden surge because of the free port. So I hope that answers the question around the free port. So.
I'm not sure I can answer the question about insurance because it's the first time I've heard that, I must say. But I think in terms of making sure that people know where the flight paths are, then of course we'll genuinely be doing that. And partly we like to do that because if people are moving into the area, they can make informed judgments about what they're likely to see by way of overflight. So I think I must say that insurance point is not one that I've come across before, but certainly we'd be communicating where our flight paths are. It is, I mean, just build on Johan's comments there, that sort of freight facility. I mean, essentially, as an accident of geography, the East Midlands is very well located for logistics. So if you're an advanced manufacturer or a pharmaceuticals or someone who really benefits from express freight, then if you're based anywhere sort of Exeter or North or Newcastle or South, you're probably using East Midlands already, because if you're within that sort of 4-hour truck time, East Midlands is a really valuable facility and you're part of that national network. And it's a really impressive operation to watch these days. That you'll see the big wide body aircraft come over from the States and they'll disgorge into smaller aircraft that distribute all across Europe and then the reverse at the end of the night. So it's a really sophisticated operation that's already serving a wide area of the UK.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions because my ward is Cockgrave and we don't suffer from East Midlands noise. But I would just like to say that I think your presentation was absolutely excellent and very informative. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Just want to follow on from what Councillor Barney said about the ICC and also the MENT committee that I sit on. I don't think in the 9 years I've ever been to either a full ICC meeting or a MENT meeting where noise has not been on the agenda. And I can remember at one of the MENT meetings, I don't know whether you were there, Neil, we did actually have the training captain of Ryanair who spends all these days bashing the circuit, as we call it, and he got a right grueling, I can assure you. So, going back then to the community fund, just a little bit of information. We meet every 6 weeks. I've got a meeting next week. And on average, we have around about 30 applications for each meeting that we go through. Application forms are on the website. And one of the nice things about serving on that committee as well, we actually get to go to where we give money to. We get invites all across the 3 counties I can remember we went with Steve, the managing director, several weeks ago to a bowls school in Melbourne where we had a game of bowls, and everywhere we go, one of the nice things about it is always tea and cake. So, but we do get to go out. I know that's a problem, but we do get to go out and see the communities. And one of the most memorable ones was Swarkston Sailing Club for the disabled, where we provided 2 hoists to hoist them in and out the boat. And what I found absolutely fascinating, there was a girl there, a teenage girl, actually steering these very fast racing yachts with a chin. That's the only part of her body she can move. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, so it's the most enjoyable side. But without that community fund, people like that wouldn't benefit. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to come back on Councillor Plant's question when you explained about the noise contours and the how that influences where the sound insulation grants are. I think there's 2 things really. Presumably the sound contour is how loud the noise is at that point, and I know that they have them for daytime contours and nighttime contours. I think the other factor is how frequently you experience that noise, because a flight overhead, especially in the summer, just stops the conversation. And if it's two in the evening, it's one thing, but if it's one every, couple of minutes, it's something else. So I would just ask if that could be taken into consideration when determining the areas that you provide sound insulation grants to. And indeed, if the pre-put's going to bring more prosperity in, whether it brings more flights in or not, surely that would mean that there should be more funding going towards grants. So.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I hesitate because the sort of monitoring and measurement of noise is quite a technical topic, but I think the noise footprint that I described, that 55 decibels, it's an average in effect. So it takes account of the numbers of movements and how noisy they are. So it does have a frequency component to it. But actually, the challenge that we made a change to the scheme about was the reverse, I think, to what you're saying, not the frequency, but particularly because we're focused at night. What I was hearing quite a lot from people that sounded very legitimate is it's not the vast majority of aircraft that trouble me because I don't hear them, but it's the one at 2:30 or it's the one at 5 o'clock. And it's that one that's a real problem. So what we did is we added a second criteria to the sound insulation grant scheme. And we said we'd take account of the noisiest aircraft in regular use. And that's a different sort of noise contour. It's what's called a single event contour. So the boundary of the scheme is the bigger of the two. So we do take account of the small number of operations by noisy aircraft and the large number of operations by quieter aircraft within the way we devise the scheme at the moment.
We've had a healthy debate, and I'm reassured to hear the airport authorities considering the feedback from the ICC very seriously, and changes have been made over the last 2 years. So that's reassuring to hear. I just had a small point in terms of recommendation from the group. There are two important schemes. One is the community grant fund and the insulation grant scheme. Could we make a recommendation that when they are released, when the funds are made available, it's shared with Rushcliffe Borough Council, and the council also publicizes it through their social media so people become more aware about it, and also potentially have a article in the local press. It might be digital, but that way more people come to know about the funding all over Rushcliffe.
No, absolutely, and we can ensure that we share the information with you. We have a media centre in which we publish all our press articles about, funding and things like that. Whenever there is an award of a community grant fund, particularly, or a bigger grant to help with sustainability initiatives, we do try and work with the recipients of that fund to celebrate that fact, because it's good news for us and it's often good news for the recipient too. And we do share it on our social media channels. And if there is a local newsletter or a community newsletter in that area, we do try and target and get some coverage that way. So we'll try and ensure that your communications team receive that information and then can help amplify it.
Thank
you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much for the very informative presentation as well. It's nice to know that things are being looked into and everything's been taken seriously. I live in Ruddington, and where we are, the planes come from our village sort of towards Edwalton, between Ruddington and Edwalton, come round across, and then we see them go down the other side. How wide is the corridor that they are coming around taking before they're going to final approach? Because in the summertime, they actually come over the village. So they tend to come straight round over the village, and they seem to take a very shorter route.
It's one of the things that's going to change in the future arrangement with airspace, because at the moment, the departures are on tightly defined, published corridors, and we measure how many are within that corridor. And the corridor, from memory, I think, is about 1,200 metres either side of the line. But with arrivals, under the current way that air traffic control works, they don't have a defined flight path. The only bit that's defined is that final approach, that straight line where they concentrate. And what happens is we receive them from National Air Traffic Services, 20, 30 miles away from the airport, and then the controller will talk to the pilot and pass instructions about how to fly, and it's what's called vectoring. It's pretty much, fly on this bearing and then take a left turn. And what he'll be doing is he'll be manually ensuring that the aircraft are all safely separated from each other. So it's quite a task that he's doing that in real time. What happened in the future is we'll actually define flight paths and the aircraft will fly more systematically, and the controller will supervise it but won't be intervening directly. So what tends to happen is that arrivals can be a bit less predictable and can be spread much more broadly than departures in the main.
I think I can add to that. I've flown that approach many times. On a good clear day, when you're visual with the airfield, a lot of pilots will ask for a visual approach, or visually, or the air traffic will tell you to self-locate onto the localizer. To obviously saving money and fuel. Maybe in future, Neil, it might be an idea to, when you do these routes, to stop any visual approaches. That's to tighten up that corridor. I mean, I've done a visual approach many times. So.
And just to pick up on that, but that's absolutely the intention, is that the way that air traffic's developing, I say not just at East Midlands but across the UK, is to make it much more systemised, so it all works automatically, and that's when you get more efficiencies. So we tend not to get, because we're not a really big, as busy airport, holding, but if you get to some of the bigger airports, certainly Heathrow, Gatwick, Manchester, you tend to find that aircraft arrive in bunches and they've got to be safely separated. So they'll do what's called holding. They'll sit in a hold and they'll circle until they get the slot to come in. We're expecting that as part of this process, that will just become a thing of the past, because if you need the aircraft to arrive at a certain time, the idea is you know exactly where he's flying. You slow him up when he's 400 or 500 miles away, so he arrives at exactly the right time to land on the runway every time, and every aircraft does that. And so the system works itself much more effectively, much less at the moment, which is quite manual, and the control is actually doing a lot of activity. It's going to be an interesting change for air traffic control. It's going to change the nature of their job. They'll become very much more supervisors rather than really driving and controlling where the aircraft fly.
Councillor Mallender.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for a very interesting presentation. It's interesting to see how it develops in the future. I'm in Lady Bay, so we do get the planes sort of coming in, heading usually east before they start to make the turn to come back to come on land heading west. Don't get an awful lot of noise. Obviously, there was more of it during the pandemic, and it was very noticeable seeing some of the 747s almost coming out of retirement. You think, where the hell did they get that one from? So a couple of questions. One is so the noise has reduced down to this QT2 or whatever it is. What's the future on that? Because obviously there's a limit to the amount that you can sort of reduce the noise. But what we are expecting to see is different fuel types being brought in, and potentially electric aircraft for shorter range as well, or maybe alternative fuel types as well. Do you see any of these sort of things having an impact on the noise? And another thing, just related to that, so you've got some of the training flights. Do the training flights tend to use older and therefore noisier aircraft? I just wondered, many years ago as a student, I lived in accommodation that was at Teesside Airport. And Sunday morning was when they used to do the training flights. There'd be a 707 doing touch and goes constantly, which was terrible with student hangovers. So just a couple of points for you there.
I suppose the first thing I'd say is that the aircraft individually get quieter over time. That's what we've seen. And the most obvious example of that at the moment is the sort of 737 size aircraft, the Ryanair low-cost style aircraft, about 150 seats. We're seeing increasingly the new generation of those starting to arrive at East Midlands. They are significantly quieter. We know that from measuring them as they go out. The improvement's probably a little bit more on departure because it comes from the engine technology more than the airframe technology. You tend to get a mix of the sort of aerodynamic noise from the airframe on arrival as well as the engine noise. But as well as working obviously within MAG in my day job, I spend quite a lot of time working with a group called Sustainable Aviation, which is where all of the players from aerospace and aviation come together. So all the big airports, along with Rolls-Royce, Airbus, Boeing, air traffic control. So we all come together and, you know, collectively look at noise and emissions. We're about actually to republish a document there called the Noise Roadmap, and it sets out what the industry expects to happen in terms of noise in the future. And I don't want to steal any sort of headlines from that report when it's published, but I think we're confident that we're going to continue to see good improvement in noise into the future, of the foreseeable future, which is a good thing. There are, though, one or two. It's interesting that you raise the issue about emissions, because there are one or two unanswered questions about trade-offs. Because when you're trying to make an aircraft engine, you've got to decide what you prioritize, and there can be situations where some engines could be more fuel efficient, but that would make them noisier. And there's really a balance to be struck about what priorities the aerospace industry has. And again, there's quite a healthy conversation with government about what does the policy want to drive most, in effect. But I think overall we're confident we're going to see noise individually from aircraft improve into the future. And on those alternative fuels, I suppose what I would say is that we're already seeing in small volumes but growing quickly sustainable kerosene, what's called SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, which is making kerosene in a different way that reduces the life cycle emissions of the fuel. And we'll see that develop really quickly. There's going to be a mandate in the UK that by 2030, which is only less than 7 years now, 10% of all fuel in the UK will have to be SAF, and it'll have to make savings of at least 70% in carbon. So that's going to be a big change for the airlines. But in terms of noise, you won't notice any different because it just gets mixed with normal fuel and flown in today's aircraft. What we'd expect to see in the future is lots more aircraft using today's technology. What we'll probably see, we think, from about the mid-2030s is hydrogen aircraft, but likely to burn hydrogen in something that looks very similar to a turbofan engine like today. So probably similar-ish noise characteristics. What we're not expecting to see in large numbers is electric aircraft. And I think electric aircraft have a role. In fact, DHL have bought some electric aircraft that are going to be flying in the States, but they're relatively small, low payload aircraft. So they'll have a role. But I think, again, it would be disingenuous to suggest we're going to get them to replace the sort of Ryanair style operation, simply because the energy that aircraft require is so high, the energy density is really high. And, you know, the automotive manufacturers have invested, really led the way in this and invested a lot of money to get an order of magnitude improvement in batteries. But to make them really viable for commercial aviation at scale, we need another order of magnitude, and that's quite hard to see for the foreseeable future. So we're not planning on that, but we are planning on sustainable aviation fuel and hydrogen as part of the mix as we get into the future.
Thank you very much. I think just everybody's been able to kind of make the points and address you and to raise questions and that. And just like to say thank you very much for coming this evening and presenting to us. And as has been alluded to, very informative and interesting with what you've presented to us today, and also for asking all our questions and answering them and that. And so thank you very much for that. I just want to go over, because we've had a few requests in terms of recommendations or actions, so just wanting to go over those of what's going to be taken away this evening. So just pass it to Darren.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Tracy will have greater detail because these will come out in the minutes as actions, but the three I picked up is there's a link that we've agreed that we'll be sharing with the group that comes from the Civil Aviation Authority's website. I didn't quite pick up the exact link of that. Did you get that in the actions, Tracy? I just want to double check.
We're going to share it.
Yeah, you got that. So we've got some feedback that we'd like to give to planning colleagues in relation to potentially on any future local plans, about feedback on planning and sound insulation in any new developments. And the last one is that we've agreed that you will share the information on grants when that's readily available with our comms team, and we will help promote that through our normal channels. Councillor Thomas.
Councillor Thomas.
Could I just add to that last, publicity campaign? Could we include the correct way to complain about noise in that as well? I mean, there's the good news about the grants and the sound insulation grant, but if we could just pop that complaint procedure in there, then it would help, I think.
I think maybe if it's something that we could cover in the Rushcliffe News and that depending on timings for when they go out, but maybe around, of course, with timings of funding and that might be, but to mention, but certainly around where people can go for any complaints and information about what we've been discussing here tonight.
Yep, happy to take that away as an action. I think, as Councillor Sims was saying, it may well be that we decide not to put it in the larger, maybe Rushcliffe Reports magazine that goes to everyone, because you were mentioning some areas are more affected than others. So we do try, and Rushcliffe Reports try and put as much stuff in there that affects residents across the borough. But certainly we're happy to provide that, certainly with local councillors in wards that may be more affected. So yeah, definitely can do that.
Thank you very much. Just looking at, I think all we had, as we often get in these meetings, is a recommendation, and it was just for us to consider the information, provide feedback, which I think we've done very tonight, and I thank all councillors for their contributions, and to the gentleman from East Midlands Airport for coming again. So I'll draw this item to close now. We've only got the one more item on our agenda, and it's in relation to the work programme. Quite welcome to stay for this short bit, or if you want to depart, it's entirely up to you. Thank you very much. Just get to councillors about the work programme. We've just got on there confirmed date for the next meeting on the 21st of March, and got two items on there, being the streetwise update and the carbon management plan update and review, which comes around every year. And then at the moment, haven't got a date yet for the June meeting, because of course that gets confirmed at the May full council meeting. And at the moment, we have only got the use of the community facilities, and both those meetings, like as always, has a review of the work programme. So if you've got any comments or questions around that, but I'm sure that corporate overview will have some more matrices for us to consider, and it could change again. So unless you've got any comment, could I have a show of hands for approval of the work programme, please? Thank you very much. And thank you very much, councillors, for your time this evening and contribution. Thank you very much, and I'll draw this meeting to a close.